Hey everybody, Derek Judd, the Cowboy Criminologist here with Cowboy Criminology. So if you haven't been keeping up, uh, there's been a lot going on. Made it through to the halfway point in my first semester of law school, so very excited about that. Still a little too early to be celebrating, but uh, along with that, uh, I wrote a book last year, and I recently got it published. September 22nd was the official launch date for the book. And so, if you've been seeing my promo video for the Five Nights of Terror, you should have a pretty good idea what we're talking about. And so, the book, of course, is Monsters Have Always Walked Among Us. And the subtitle for it is Vampires, Werewolves, Zombies, and Witches: How Serial Killers Help Create the Monsters That We Fear. And of course, it's by yours truly, Derek Judd, the Cowboy Criminologist. Um, so, one thing that didn't come out quite right is there's supposed to be a QR code on the back that people can scan, take you directly to Cowboy Criminology. Didn't work out quite as good as I hoped, but you know what? Just production notes for edition 2. So, when I say I wrote this book, I want to give you all a little kind of background. All right, this isn't just something that I plugged into AI and it spit out a book. This actually started off as a research project when I was going back and forth about whether I was going to go back to school and get my PhD or if I was going to get into law school. So there's actually 3 versions of this book. There's a doctoral dissertation version, there is a textbook version, and then there's just the fun reading version, which is the one that I had published, just because while it's written at it's written at a higher level, I kept the language pretty simple. I kept everything pretty simple. And it's just a bare bones breakdown. You know, I'm not trying to convince anybody how smart I am, show anybody how smart I am, or anything like that. But when I started looking into the subject matter, the deeper I got into it, the more I was just like, wow, this is really good. And when you think about how serial killers help create the monsters that we fear, I think everybody, at least on some level, kind of gets that connection. All right, an evil deed is done, something outside of what we've seen before, but for some reason, there seems to be just a kind of a disconnect. It's like we understand that, but I never really found anything that really kind of went further. So I'm going to read from the book a little out of order. I hope y'all don't mind, but I want to save my favorite chapter for last. So I'm going to tell you what that is, because then, you know, you guys might, you know, want to skip to the good part, or what I think is the good part. I think there's a lot in here that is going to connect a lot of dots as far as why we give serial killers the names that we do. And so, y'all, this book was a lot of fun to write. It became a passion project, but it wasn't something, it was never something like, man, I got to work on the book. It was always something that I was like, man, I'm excited, because I just kept finding research and more research, and it was strange where it led me, especially in the chapters regarding zombies and witches, because those are such generic terms and they mean different things in different cultures, religions, what have you. It made those 2 particular sections very I could have written an entire volume just off of that information alone. All right. So, without further ado, I want to share with you a little section of Monsters Have Always Walked Among Us. Now, if you have your book, you can follow along on page 328. And if you don't, go to Amazon. The book is also going to come out on Google Books, iBooks, Barnes & Noble Nook here in the upcoming weeks. So I'm just waiting for, I'm waiting to hear back from my publication team. And yeah, that should just be coming right up. So without further ado, art always imitates life. The reverse is never true. Hans Christian Andersen wrote the fairy tale The Little Mermaid. There's nothing odd about this, as sailors were known to tell tales to anyone who would listen about far-off places they had been to and the strange and wonderful creatures they had encountered. However, the original story leaves the Little Mermaid in quite a predicament. To turn back into a mermaid, she has to kill the prince and walk in his blood to make the excruciating pain in her legs disappear. If she completes this task, she will turn back into a mermaid. With none of these options being desirable choices, she condemns herself to the ocean. What does The Little Mermaid teach us about serial killers? If you compare The Little Mermaid to the Candyman case discussed earlier, it might help you to give you some perspective. In both cases, naive teens were promised something they deserved by someone who ensured they would never be free of them and would have to make sacrifices to get what they wanted. Ultimately, the teens in both stories lost their lives or their freedom when it was obvious that regardless of what else happened, they would never be free from those they chose to associate with. As we all know, the villain in The Little Mermaid is the Sea Witch. Could Dean Coral, have understood his ability to manipulate, dominate, and control? Henley and Brooks as the Sea Witch controlled the Little Mermaid. It seems quite possible that in the end, Henley killed Coral, yet Coral never had to serve time for his crimes and died just after torturing and instilling fear in the last of his victims. The most famous case of the blood of the youth being used to replenish the aging body was Elizabeth Bathory. As mentioned earlier, after conducting research, Bathory's case is somewhat suspect, but what if we suppose that someone else dabbling in the occult heard that the blood of the young maidens could replenish youth and possibly make one immortal? The grim fairy tale of Snow White involves a scheming, jealous stepmother becoming ever more jealous of the beauty that Snow White is becoming. The evil stepmother orders her huntsman to kill Snow White, which he fails to do. However, the organs he brings back to the evil queen are devoured so that she can not only possess Snow White's beauty, but also her life force. After discovering the huntsman's duplicity, the queen disguises herself and sells Snow White a corset, which the evil stepmother laces up so tight Snow White stops breathing. Her small friends rescue her by cutting her free. The second attempt to poison Snow White is done with a comb, but is again saved by her friends. The third time, when Snow White is given the poisoned apple that we know so well, Snow White dies. You may not know that the prince in Snow White never saves her with true love's first kiss. He merely buys her and keeps her as a possession that his servants carry everywhere the prince goes. Snow White is not revived until the servants drop the coffin, expelling the piece of poisoned apple lodged in her throat. It should also be noted that Snow White is not a young teenager in the grim version when all of this happens. This story is terrifying in that a grown man and woman are bent on possessing the body of a young girl. What does Snow White teach us about serial killers? One could argue that parents should be watchful around people who pay too much attention to children and appear to be obsessed with the child's looks. Indeed, not speaking with strangers or accepting gifts from strangers tops that list. While the prince in Snow White has some issues, we see the establishment of the trophy collector. When speaking about serial killers, the killer often takes something from their victims to possess the person so they can never forget the time they spent with the victim. A lock of hair, an identification card, jewelry, clothing, body parts. Wisconsin ghoul Ed Gein made human skin suits from the bodies of the grapes that he robbed. Dahmer and Fish ate pieces of their victims. Bittaker, Norris, Lake Ing, Carla Homolka, and Par Bernardo tape recorded their victims' torture sessions. Sleeping Beauty is probably the best known tale for being far from the original. This story contains rape, necrophilia, abuse of a corpse, cannibalistic fairies, and a king hiding a sex slave from his wife. While falling short of cannibalism, the Sleeping Beauty tale is eerily similar to that of Colleen Stan. Colleen met Cameron Hooker and his wife Janice while she was hitchhiking. Cameron negotiated with Janice that he could take a sex slave if Janice could have another child. Colleen was kept prisoner by the Hookers for 7 years before Janice called the authorities on her husband. The book The Perfect Victim was co-written by Hooker's prosecutor, Christine McGuire, with the cooperation of Colleen Stan, and it is marvelously well written, yet often goes uncited in top true crime books. The Perfect Victim explains a lot about the psychology of Hooker, Janice, and the mental state of Stan during the trial prep. McGuire leads a fierce group of female prosecutors along with Linda Fairstein, who helped shape rape shield laws and transformed how domestic violence is prosecuted. If you have the time, anything you could read by these two phenomenal women is well worth your time. Were fairy tales specifically created to help us warn children of the dangers of serial killers? Some could argue that fairy tales were true crime amalgamations designed to warn children of daily dangers and that people are not always what they seem. However, it is difficult to ignore how many fairy tales correlate to the behavior of serial killers. In the 1980s, elementary school children were taught to avoid strangers. Do not get in a car with someone you don't know. Gavin DeBecker has lectured on this topic innumerable times, telling people that once they get into a predator's car, their odds of survival drop exponentially. Ted Bundy was infamous for his smooth approach in getting women to go off with him and enter his car, even though there was something off about the handsome stranger. Carol DeRange was enjoying a day of milling about a shopping center when she was approached by a well-dressed, pleasant-looking man who identified himself as a detective investigating a car that had been broken into in the shopping center parking lot, and witnesses told him it was her vehicle. DeRange accompanied the detective until he told her to get into a Volkswagen Beetle with no front seat. DeRange began to feel uncomfortable, and that is when the detective attempted to pull her into the car. DeRange began yelling and screaming, drawing onlookers' attention and pulling away with all her might. Finally, she freed herself and watched the Beetle speed out of the parking lot. When she saw the face of the suspect, Ted Bundy, on the news, she immediately recognized him as the man who tried to abduct her. Pat Brown, Gavin DeBecker, John Douglas, John Walsh, and others all give the same advice: when something does not feel right, it's probably not. When something does not feel right, this is not the time to worry about perception, social graces, embarrassing oneself or another, causing a scene, causing a panic, or hurting someone's feelings. No, this is when you need to make your desire to keep yourself alive. No. The expert I listed above agree that signaling to an attacker at the first sign of trouble that you will not be an easy target has saved too many lives to mention. If the person genuinely means you no harm, they will quickly stop whatever makes you uncomfortable. The best way to view this is that you can survive embarrassment for a little while, but you will be dead for a much longer time. Why then do we need to understand monsters? Monsters must be understood to contextualize violent criminals' actions by how they encounter, subdue, interact with, and dispose of their victims. Why then do we need to understand fairy tales? Fairy tales allow us to quickly recognize and remember the types of monsters that lurk about and understand their modus operandi and signature. If you remember nothing else about monsters and fairy tales, I would like you to remember that just as a fairy tale warns children to be aware of the dangers that lurk when they are too trusting and unsuspecting, So too is it a warning to parents about being vigilant about knowing where their children are, who they are with, where they are allowed to go, and with whom. Where can children walk alone, and how far away from a responsible person can they be before they are too far away? If you are a criminal justice professional reading this, you might think, what a load of crap, fairy tales and nonsense. I want to end this chapter with a stark warning about the importance of fairy tales for parents, children, criminal justice practitioners, teachers, and caretakers. Fairy tales do not tell children dragons exist. Children already know dragons exist. Fairy tales tell children dragons can be killed. It's a quote from G.K. Chesterton. It's a good reminder to us all. So, y'all, that's the introduction to Monsters Have Always Walked Among Us. I hope I'm going to leave a link in the description for the video below where you can pick it up. I have it. It's available on Kindle. It's available on paperback, and it's available in hard copy. I do like the hard copy version, and on top of that, I am getting some author copies of the book, and I'm going to set 5 aside that I'm going to annotate. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to make notes like I did in my copy, author's notes like I did in my copy. And those will just be things that I want to do in the second edition, things I want to do, things I want to bring up, clarify, change, things I was thinking about when I was writing the book. And then I'll have 5 unannotated copies that can be available for me to put a signature in. So I'm looking forward to getting those. Y'all, I hope you enjoyed this. If you know anybody who's interested in true crime and you enjoyed kind of the flow of me talking about monsters, I'd appreciate it if you'd share this with them and let them know where they can purchase this book. I'm going to be doing, let's see, I promised y'all 5 Nights of Terror, so I've got 4 more videos after this that are going to be coming, and each one is going to get just a little darker, a little heavier, but y'all, you know how I do on the channel. I try and keep everything informational without being without overly sensationalizing everything. There's a lot of channels that do that, and it works for them. But the motto on this channel is getting to the truth behind true crime, and I think if you're looking to really understand true crime, criminology, serial killer origins, y'all, I don't think there's a better way to do that than with Monsters Have Always Walked Among Us. I'm Derek Judd for Cowboy Criminology. Y'all have a great week. We'll talk to you next time. Take care.
Ha 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 ha!